Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm going to be talking about a subgenre of books that blur the line between fiction and non-fiction. So as people know on this channel, I read a lot of fiction, but I also read a lot of non-fiction, and as I was kind of going through my shelves, I realised I have a collection of books that I really think blur the distinction between the two. Often when we talk of reading and we talk of kind of genres, fiction and non-fiction is kind of one of the major polarising divides at the very beginning when you talk about what books you like to read, and there's a tendency to treat non-fiction as being very dry, dull, boring, hard and fast facts, and then fiction being the realm of creativity. And actually I think that there are a lot of books that kind of cross over between the two. So today I'm going to talk about 6 books that I feel really blur those lines. We've got a non-fiction that reads more like a fiction, a fictional book that was written in a way that implied it was non-fiction, and then a collection of fiction books that have a non-fiction topic at their heart and something that is a genuinely true account that they are fictionalizing or dramatizing in some way. This will make more sense when I actually start to talk about the books. So, my literary non-fiction that I want to talk about is Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments by Saidiya Hartman. This is a non-fiction book looking at the black queer, or not just queer, but black community in the turn of the century in America, just after slavery, before there were any major real advancements in rights, and focused on the women in this community and basically what was life like for them. And the reason why I call it almost like literary non-fiction is the writing style is very lyrical and very, for lack of a better word, literary, and it really reads more like a fictional account of a collection of characters in one sort of space. It's not a non-fiction in the sense of lots of very like strict facts or any sort of like things that you could kind of easily like quote or kind of bring up at a dinner party or anything like that. It's more painting a broad picture of a social history of this particular community, and it's a really interesting book that is looking at how do we discuss groups and like individuals within history who have been marginalised and we don't have the best original sources on, and how do we kind of give them back a voice, and how do we paint them when we are talking about them in a modern day context, and what basically is the role of the historian and the non-fiction writer when we're looking back at people. I think it's a really interesting book, and if you're someone who enjoys literary fiction but you don't necessarily go for non-fiction, I think that this would really appeal, because I could totally see this being the style of book that if you told me that these were all fictional people, like this would be up for like a booker. It's kind of that almost style of writing, and I think it's really interesting and is like haunting and definitely going to stay with me for quite a while. The next book I wanted to talk about was my fictional non-fiction, which is Art on Fire by Hilary Sloin. This is an entirely fabricated biography of a lesbian artist and about her life story and how she ran away from home, and then within it there are a collection of essays and sort of critiques of her seminal work. And the thing that I really love about this book is it is entirely dedicated to carrying off the narrative that it is a non-fiction true biography, to the point where it was actually nominated for a few non-fiction awards when it was first published. It goes so far as to include like footnotes from articles that have never actually been written, and really is interested in carrying off this kind of narrative. And it's a wonderful discussion about separating the art from the artist, sort of the role of the art critic within the art world, as well as this young woman's sort of exploration of her identity and her sexuality and her relationship with her family. It's incredible and stunning, and such a cool feat of fiction that is really playing around with the narrative form in a very interesting way, and I would love to read more examples of fiction pretending to be non-fiction. I think it's genuinely such an interesting and cool idea. So the next 4 books I want to talk about are all fiction books, but at the heart of their story is either a true event or kind of phenomena, or a true person, a real person who is alive, and that the book is trying to sort of be truthful to that person in real life. There are plenty of things out there that are inspired by, but these are ones that are really trying to ring true to exactly how it was in the real world, and that truth is really at the heart of the story, if that makes any sense. And the first example I have for that is The Summer Queen by Elizabeth Chadwick, and this is actually the first book in a trilogy. I've just finished the trilogy, it was excellent, and this is about Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor of Aquitaine was a queen who was around in the 1100s. She was at one point in time Queen of France. She was also Queen of England. Her actual sort of her birthright was Aquitaine, which was a section which I think is now in what we consider France but wouldn't have been France at the time. She was mother to Richard the Lionheart, who is a really big character or individual from British history, and she was married to Henry II for quite a long period of time. She's a phenomenal woman, and this trilogy is focused on being as true to her story and her reality in her life as it possibly can be, but giving her a real sort of voice and dramatising various aspects of her life. And it's very interesting because the author's notes at the back also talk about the research done into this for this book, and the small points where it does either deviate or the author has had to fill in gaps of things that we don't know. I think it's a really lovely way of looking at a fascinating woman through history, and it's just a lovely example of a historical fiction that just happens to be like super true, which I think is a very cool way of learning about history. The next one I wanted to talk about is actually based on somebody who is still alive, I believe, and that is The Museum of Modern Love by Heather Rose. And this is a piece of work that is inspired by the performance artist Mariana Abramovic, and is about one of her performance pieces where she sat in the art gallery in, I believe in the MoMA in New York, or the Guggenheim, can't remember which, and basically she sat at this table and you had the ability to go and sit opposite her, but you couldn't say anything and she wouldn't say anything, and you could stay there for as long as you wanted. And the book is kind of a collection of different characters, their interactions with this real piece of performance art that happened, and within it we also get glimpses of Mariana as she is portrayed in this book, and also information from people who have known her and kind of her body of work in general. So it is heavily inspired by, but it's also really leaning on the true facts of this particular art event that occurred and the different ways that people interact with it. It's the kind of book that if you're into art and sort of history of art, I think you'll find really interesting. It kind of looks at performance art as a genre and like what on earth is it, basically. It's a very sort of modern art thing that a lot of people don't feel like they fully understand, and sort of talking about the different ways that it can impact people. And I thought it was such an interesting and really powerful book, especially given that Mariana is still alive and presumably has the ability to read and comment on this work. So I think it's very bold of the author to go for that. Branching off of specific individuals from history, I'm now going to be talking about books that are focused on bodies of work or bodies of information. And so one of those is Sophies World by Jostein Gaarder. This is the book that it was the reason why I studied philosophy at university. It's technically a fiction, and it's about a young girl called Sophie who starts to have these really strange interactions. She starts to find letters being left for her, and basically it becomes about her education in about the history of philosophy, but then it also starts to get into a very strange breaking the fourth wall, bringing the author or the reader into it, and it starts to play around with what are the concepts of reality and kind of how real are these fictional characters. I read it a very long time ago, and I keep meaning to reread it. I read it when I was in year 9, so like 12 or 13, but it is a book that has stuck with me the longest, is, like I said, the reason why I took my degree at university, and huge chunks of this book are dedicated to teaching Sophie, and therefore the reader, about the history of philosophy. So as well as some of it you get written down, so like this bit here is basically just like a history of philosophy textbook. There are sections where they kind of talk about the history of philosophy as well, the two characters. So like I'd say comfortably 2/3 of this book is nothing to do with the fictional story and is actually to do with learning about the history of philosophy. So it's a lovely way of being introduced to it. I think that this book is probably the reason why many people ended up taking philosophy at university. I think this one gets cited in people's personal statements so often. So Jostein Gaarder has massively helped the philosophy world and community because of that. And then the final one I wanted to talk about is The Bees by Laline Paull. So this is weird and I love it. This is a book that is told entirely from the point of view of a bee, and it's about the life cycle of a bee, and you can kind of read it in sort of a crazy dystopian world-esque type way until you find out that actually like the crazy things that happen in this book are entirely biologically accurate. Like Laline Paull describes sort of attacks from wasps, the process of dancing to tell the bee's kind of information between the different roles that the bee ends up playing, the kind of what it's like to go out on journey and how she navigates her space in the world. It is entirely, as far as I'm aware, biologically accurate, and it's a wonderful way of getting inside the head of an insect and kind of sort of learning what that world would be like, and the sort of infrastructure that is in place within a hive. So this is the kind of book that is really a Marmite book. You're either going to absolutely adore it like I did, or you're going to think it's really weird and not want to touch it, and that's completely fair enough. But I think if you're interested in biology or nature writing or anything like that, like, this is a really fun way of learning about bees without actually sitting down and reading a non-fiction book about them. So that's it from me. Those are a collection of books that I think are really good at blurring the lines between fiction and non-fiction, which I find so fascinating because we have certain expected sort of tropes and rules of different genres, whereas actually there are some really amazing books out there that help to really blur those lines between and can create something really beautiful and wonderful because of it. If you have any other recommendations for books that fall into any of these categories, whether it be fiction books that at their heart have a lot of non-fiction, or indeed a fiction book pretending to be non-fiction, I'd love to have more of those. I do have a few on my want to read list that I already know about. I know that Tracy Chevalier has a wonderful book about Mary Anning called Remarkable Creatures. I've not read it yet. I do want to, and I know that there are a lot of fiction books out there that are inspired by true events, so I do understand that this is a more common trope that I'm potentially portraying here, but these are books that I wanted to talk about that I think really ring as close to truth as they possibly can be, and are interested in that discussion about truth at their heart. So have you added any of these to your TBR? Have you read any of them before? Do let me know in the comments down below. Have a wonderful reading week, and I will chat to you soon. Bye!